to the 2022 Spring Hack and Learn Show and Tell. This is a session that is hosted by Indigo, the International Network for Data on Impact and Governance Outcomes here at the University of Oxford. We are hosting this event. We've been hosting the Hack and Learn in partnership with the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University in India and Insper Matrices at the University of São Paulo in Brazil. My name is Mara Iroldi, and I am the Director of the Government Outcomes Lab at the Blavatsky School of Government here at the University of Oxford. Please do introduce yourself in the chat, saying who you are, where you are calling from, and good morning, good afternoon, or good evening to all of you, and thank you for joining us. We are really excited whenever we come to the show and tell, because it's the moment where we see what have been the ideas and pilots, experimentation that have been tried during the 2 weeks of the Hack and Learn. I remind everybody that the Hack and Learn is on a voluntary basis when people work during their spare times on top of their day job. So usually what we manage to achieve always surprises us. There is no special professional team running these sessions. It's a community of data enthusiasts who want to use data to generate insights. So I'm very grateful to each one of you who participated in this Hack and Learn. I hope you had fun. And for today in particular, I'm also grateful to two guests who are the experts, a panel of two experts that will be providing us some feedback and suggestion ideas after they've heard the results of your Hack and Learn. So I'm very pleased to introduce Carolina Pedrosa Gomez de Melo. She is from Insper, and she has a PhD in business economics and master in public administration development practice from Colombia. Her bachelor degree is in business administration from the University of North Florida. So a lot of brain power. She has also a lot of work experience in terms of impact evaluation for a number of social programs, and in her capacity of research director at MGov in Brazil. Currently it's called MOVA, if you know that neck of the hood. She's worked as a consultant, as a research assistant, and she also worked for the UN program for renewed effort against child hunger and undernutrition, UN REACH, when she was working in Maputo, Mozambique. So as a researcher now, she is interested in early childhood development, health economics, economics of education, sustainable development, and industrial organization. So she kindly offered her time to give feedback on a couple of challenges. We also have Silvana Fumega, who is the project director of the Global Data Barometer project, who is soon to be launched, and we are all waiting to see the report being launched in the coming weeks. She's also the Research and Policy Director of ILDA, which is the Latin America Initiative for Open Data. She has a PhD from the University of Tasmania in Australia and a Master in Public Policy from Victoria University in Wellington, New Zealand, and a degree in Political Science from Buenos Aires, Argentina. She has many years of experience as a consultant for several international organizations, for governments and civil society groups. And most recently, she is really focused on the intersection of data and inclusion policies. So again, lots of experience, lots of insight, lots of experience, and lots of personal experience of working with data. So thank you to Carolina and Silvana for being here and providing feedback. Now, let me say two things about how we are organizing the next 53 minutes. We are starting off the session with a brief introduction to the Hack and Learn. What have we done? What it looked like? And then we will dive in a summary of the challenges. What were the outputs? What have been the learnings and the ideas? And for each of the outputs, we will have feedback from our expert that I just introduced, and we will open for question and answer. So with no further ado, I'll pass over to Juliana, who will give us an overview of what happened in the past 2 weeks.
Great. Thank you, Mara. So what I want to do now is to give a brief overview of what the Hack and Learn has been doing in these past 2 weeks, mostly for those who couldn't attend our kickoff session or for those who are here for the first time. So our kickoff session started on the 24th of March, and that's the day when we presented our list of challenges. We met the participants of this year, and participants joined our Slack channels. From that moment until today, these participants have been working very hard on our Slack channels, and they have been addressing 5 different and very exciting challenges. All these challenges somehow are related with social outcomes. Some of them are more related with funds and philanthropic funds. Some of them are more related with data and RCT evaluations, but all of them have something in common, which is the idea of producing insights to generate better social outcomes in the future. I would also like to say that the Hack and Learn is not finishing today. We are just finishing the hacking period because we all want to write a blog with our experiences, and we want to have a document that summarizes all our learnings and findings from this year. So that's what we are going to be doing, and we're going to present this blog in the next Indigo peer learning session. So again, this is an invitation for all the Hack and Learn participants who still want to contribute and want to do something with these findings and want to present these learnings to the world. This year, I'm not going to say much about the challenges because we have the challenges presentations, but I'm just going to say 2 lines. We have 5 challenges. The first one is addressing the relationship between outcome metrics and sustainable development goals. So they are improving our impact bond data set, doing data inputs about sustainable development goals. The second challenge is the SPARKS challenge. And I think SPARKS stands for Strategic Procurement, Applied Knowledge, Applied Research and Knowledge Sharing. And this is an initiative from the POGO Club. The POGO Club is a working group from the Go Lab specializing in procurement. They are working, their work was based on looking for outcomes framework and how those outcome frameworks across the world were related with procurement practices. The third challenge was led by the Ashoka University team, and it's a challenge about philanthropic funds in India, especially thinking of foreign philanthropic funds. The fourth one is the challenge that was working with the data coming from the RCT final evaluation of the Village Enterprise DIP, which has just finished. And the last one is a team that is thinking of different use cases and how to design a data platform for the education outcome funds. This year was really interesting because we got people from all over the world. We got people from Brazil, we have people from the UK, from India, from Thailand, from Malaysia. The participants come from a very diverse places. And we were all working very hard on Slack because we all had very different time zones. So we find that Slack was the best way to organize our work. And having said that, I really want to give the time to the participants so they can share their outputs with us, and we can also hear the feedback that Carolina and Silvana will share with us too. And so back to Mara.
Thank you, Juliana. So let's move into the challenge presentations, what we came here to do today. And our first presentation will be given by Georgie, who will cover challenge number 19, which is outcome matrices and the SDG. Georgie, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So I'll present the work done by the participants in challenge 19, relating social outcome metrics, social impact bonds, and sustainable development goals. So in this challenge, we joined 2 interesting topics. First, social impact bonds, and the second one, sustainable development goals. So in one side, we have social impact bonds, one form of outcome-based contracting, where the investor provides upfront funding and the payer pays for achieved outcomes. In this partnership between investors and service providers, it aims to improve the social outcomes for a specific group. And here, these social outcomes generally relates to one or more than just one sustainable development goals, one of the SDGs from the United Nations. And we used the Indigo's impact bond dataset. So next slide, please. So here we have three main aims. First is to organize the data, adding the SDG, which related to each of the social outcome. The second challenge here is to generate a better visualization. And we do this providing a Sankey diagram. And finally, try to extract some information from the Sankey diagram. So next, please. And here is the product of our challenge, the first product. So in the right-hand side, we have the Indigo's contracts. So here, and in the left-hand side, we have the SDGs, which the social outcomes are related on. So we have here a concentration in two main SDGs. The first one is SDG number 16, peace, justice, and strong institution. And the second one is decent work and economic growth. So based on this, we could see in a general way how these contracts are related to the SDGs, and looking in more details, so we could pick up some of interesting conclusions here. So this subset of the data set has three main points. So the first one is trying to reduce the rate of reincarceration. The second one is to promote the reintegration of prisoners. And somehow related to the second one is the third one, integrate prisoners into the labor market. So, and we also provide a Sankey diagram relating the secondary goals and targets. So the next slide, please. And here we also see a similar pattern. So we also see a concentration in the SDG number 16, peace, justice, and strong institution, and SDG number 8, decent work and economic growth. But we also see some additional goals. So reduce inequality, SDG number 10, SDG number 3, good health and well-being, and SDG number 4, quality education. So these are the main results. So next, please. Thank you very much for all the participants in Challenge 19, and we'll be very happy to listen all the feedbacks. So that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jorge. So I invite everybody who has questions to post them in the chat. We will come to the question at the end, but now I'll pass the microphone to Carolina to provide her thoughts and feedback on this challenge.
Hi, everyone. So first of all, congratulations on the work you did. I find it super interesting to see how you're connecting the social impact bond contracts to the SDGs, and I find it really important for us to advance in the agenda. So thinking about the challenge in a broader sense and how it could be useful for policymakers. So I understood that you evaluated a couple of social impact bonds, and it was the set of bonds was concentrated in a few SDGs. And from the Sankey diagram, we can learn how two central SDGs connect with a bunch of others, and how multi-sectoral is each program, each project, really. That's one interesting point. So how you always connect a policy or a program with a bunch of different sectors. and how you need to coordinate stakeholders and sectors to achieve any of the SDGs. The second point that I find very interesting about the exercise, if you expand the exercise to a bigger data set of social impact bonds and regions, you can really see what SDGs are being addressed in each region by this type of contract. And you can note whether there is a concentration in a specific SDG and whether that SDG is the critical problem of the region. So are social impact bonds addressing the critical problems of a specific region? Is there a concentration in specific SDGs? And is this concentration addressing the most important problems or not? Are there other problems in the region that are not being addressed? And for the problems being addressed, if there is a concentration in a few SDGs, are these different projects addressing the same problem in the same way, or are the projects complementing each other? So using Sankey diagrams for answering all these questions is really critical both for policymakers and researchers, so researchers could advance in the agenda of learning what other impact bonds could be implemented in different regions to address other critical problems or complement the problems that are being addressed already, so that we could advance in the sustainable development agenda in a more assertive way, really. So I think the exercise you did would be very important to be expanded for a policymaker to have a broader view of a region and what else could be done through the channel of social impact bonds to advance in the in the sustainable development agenda. So just to wrap up, I really like the exercise. I think it's super useful for both researchers and policymakers. And I congratulate you for teaching me these new tool to advance in the agenda.
Thank you, Carolina. So post your questions in the chat. If you have, we'll come to those later. I posted mine already. Thank you so much for the feedback, lots of ideas, and we will work on them over the summer to produce this additional Sankey's diagram. I'll pass the word now to Rory, who will talk to us about the SPARK challenge. SPARK stands for the Strategic Procurement and Applied Research and Knowledge Sharing. So Rory, over to you. What happened in the past 2 weeks? What have you learned?
Thanks very much. As Mara said, my name is Rory and I work at the Go Lab, and I really care about public procurement and data, so this is a pleasure to be able to present. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did or what we started to do. I think it's helpful to focus on some, like an example insight that seems to be emerging around in Scotland and Wales. We came across a potential collaboration in preparing for this challenge, and there are some opportunities to engage more in this work. If you go to the next slide, please. So what did we do? So the group members of the group came from Australia, New South Wales, from South Africa, from various places in the UK, including Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. I think some people from the group are here, so if anybody wants to chime in at any point, that you're very welcome to do so. Basically, we were looking at different. We're interested in public procurement, but we're also interested in how public procurement policies around social outcomes are influenced by things that are wider than procurement. So we're really interested in sort of the wider policy agendas and laws and regulations that are put in place that sort of might impact any particular procurement. So people shared these and we put them into a spreadsheet that we developed. The spreadsheet is open and online and people can look at it. We first developed some definitions and then we started sort of putting things in and it improved the definitions. But I think it's helpful to sort of sort of look in more detail at one particular example. Could we go to the next slide, please? So in Wales, Wales is really interesting. Wales seems to be a leader in this kind of area where you're using procurement in a strategic way to try to achieve broader outcomes. And Wales has this thing called the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. Interestingly, England and the UK generally don't have something like this. But this is where they're sort of setting up wider policy frameworks, and in Wales they've sort of formally adopted the UN SDGs as well. So so contracting authorities really have these sort of wider goals to try and meet. And then in procurement policy, there's direct reference to these wider goals. And so these are some of the policies that we were sharing within the group. If you go to the next slide. Another thing about Wales is that they have this duty, so that contracting authorities, when they're making procurement decisions, have a duty to consider socioeconomic disadvantages and inequalities related to that. So again, you sort of see the wider policies. If you go to the next slide. Something that is interesting for us is that Wales is requiring, whenever somebody's looking at social value or wider, these sort of broader policies within a procurement, that they assign a minimum weighting of 10% when evaluating individual bids. That's something that the UK has started doing for central government departments, and that's something that Northern Ireland's going to start doing. But as you'll see in a minute, it's different from the approach that Scotland seems to be taking. And when we've got this sort of difference, that's interesting if we want to learn about the effectiveness of this kind of thing, where the government's mandating a particular way of evaluating different bids. Could we go to the next slide? So switching over to Scotland, some of the policies we shared, again, Scotland has a duty, not unlike the duty that Wales now has. If we go to the next slide. Scotland also has a national performance framework that comes out of legislation, and people have to report on it. So there's a lot of data, in Scotland about performance against this sort of wider performance framework. If we go to the next slide. And then in contrast to the policy I mentioned earlier in Wales, Scotland has a procurement policy that says that they sort of don't endorse monetary gauges to measure social impact. And they talk about, success in contributing Scotland's purpose is measured in terms of outcomes. And these outcomes are aligned to the national performance framework. So you see a reluctance in Scottish procurement policy to assign the sort of mandatory rating thing that Wales is doing, and English central government, UK central government's doing, and Northern Ireland's about to do. So there's something interesting divergence happening there, perhaps. If we go to the next slide. Something that we came across while looking at this, preparing for and looking at this work, was some work, similar work that My Society was doing. This is a tool. My Society has put together a climate action plan explorer, and they're at the same time sort of thinking about how do we link this to procurement policies. So what they've done is built a database of all the different policies related to net zero, sort of carbon reduction, in the UK local authorities, and they're sort of exploring how to, how do we connect this to public procurement. So there's potential collaboration there, and a guy called Sean from Wales joined our group, and we're going to contribute to something that they're doing. So that's exciting. And then if we go to the next slide, please. Finally, if this stuff is interesting to you, please don't hesitate to contact me, and I can put you on a mailing list about this. So the POGO is the Procurement of Government Outcomes club. It's a knowledge sharing club, and one of the things we're doing is a working group around strategic procurement. That's where this sort of Sparks Challenge has come from. And we've got an upcoming session on the 26th of April about engaging VCSEs and small businesses within public procurement. Claire Dove is the current VCSE representative. I've got typos all over this because I threw it together in a minute. before this session, sorry. But the current VCSE representative, Claire Dove, is co-chairing that session. It's on the 26th of April. And one of the Nandita, who is a contributor within the group on Slack, highlighted that, oh, that's cool, Sean's here. Nandita highlighted that they're doing some interesting things in New South Wales and Australia around small business engagement, and so she's going to participate in that meeting as well. So all in all, it was a sort of helpful session to bring different policies from different places around the world together and sort of start to think about how to compare these different policies.
Yeah, thank you, Rory. I'll stop you here because I'm keen to give enough time to Silvana to offer some feedback on your challenge. Silvana?
Hey, yes, I'm here. First of all, thank you for the invitation. I'm going to say a few things. Again, I'm sorry if I don't have the whole background on the challenge because this is my first time hearing about the project. I think it's really important to have, like, I'm guessing, just to put it a name, kind of a repository about the governance framework to link procurement with social impact. I think there's a lot of things that need to be explored, and there's a lot of things that we can start like digging when we have a start and we have a place to go to see what are some of the examples on how different countries are doing that. I'm wondering, and probably this is just a wish list, so taking it like with some salt. If there are examples from other, I know this is the beginning, but I'm wondering about examples of countries or cities outside English-speaking countries. I'm thinking about that, or any other kind of group of countries or city outside the ones that we saw, just to see probably there's nothing out there, or if there's something out there, it's in a different way. And also I'm thinking about the practical way. I think that potential collaboration with My Society could go that way in terms of how to link the governance framework, the projects or some of the things that are done with the money that is spent, how we can link that in data and see if that money that is supposed to be spent into achieving certain social impacts are producing that impact or not, or how that is implemented in the real budget or spending. I mean, from the framework to the actual budget or the actual spending of a certain city or country and so on. So those are the things that are coming to my mind right now, but I'm looking forward to learn more about this project because I think it's really important to start digging deeper into these kind of things, and also trying to understand how those frameworks are related to the actual spending of a certain government, and see if we can translate that into other kind of countries or places or cities that have a different kind of legal framework.
Thank you so much, Silvana. Rory, if you have any immediate comment, I invite you to write it in the chat because we have a packed agenda, and I am keen to pass the word to Divya, who will talk to us about challenge number 21. They've been looking at foreign philanthropy in India. Divya, over to you.
Thank you, Melo. Hello, everyone. I'm Divya. I work at the Center for Social Impact and Philanthropy at Ashoka University, India. I was a challenge leader for challenge number 21, and my challenge for the participants was to analyze data on foreign philanthropy in India for the last 3 years. So just to give you a brief about the participants who joined me in this challenge, there were 2 from India, Ragul and Hani, and 1 from Scotland, Diarmuid. Diarmuid is not able to join us today as he's traveling, but I have Ragul and Hani joining me in this show and tell session. So the data on foreign philanthropy in India had 2 subsets. There was data on foreign donors, and the other data set was on recipient Indian states. I've actually encouraged the participants to present the data analysis they've done. Ragul and Hani analyzed the data on recipient Indian states, while Diarmuid, who's not here, but Hani will present his work, analyze the data on donor countries and how things have changed in the last 3 years. Right, so I will now let Ragul and Hani present the analysis. Go on, Rahul.
Yeah, sure. Okay, thanks, Divya. And yeah, first I will give an overview of philanthropy activity in India, and then Hani will present the trends specific to education. Okay, first, on average, India receives NGOs in India receives about 2,000 crores or yep. Wait, I'm sorry for this. Okay. Oh no, go back.
Previous slide.
Yeah, please. I'm sorry. Okay. Okay. First, on average, NGOs in India receives about 2,000 crore in INR or about 260 million US dollars from abroad. Okay. So the map in the right shows the distribution, geographic distribution of these funds. Funds. Okay, as you can see, these data are skewed towards the south, leaving very little for the north. Okay, so to put a number on this, the 6 southern states, which account for about 30% of the Indian population, account for 68% of the funds through FCRA. Okay, but this trend is not very surprising for if you are familiar with India, because this is the broader trend we see in India. But one surprising thing is some of the northeastern states, they are Manipur, Nagaland, and one more northeastern state are getting relatively higher amounts of FCRA from abroad than many of the North Indian states. This is surprising because generally we see northeastern states are underrepresented in those states in many parameters. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah. Okay, in this slide, we have per capita income of each state in the x-axis and amount received by each state in the y-axis. Okay, so this is a regression part showing the relationship between per capita income and amount received by each state, NGOs in each state. So as we can see a positive relationship with per capita income and FCRA, which means the rich states are getting more, while the relatively poorer states are getting less. Yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the distribution of FCRA by the NGOs working in each sector. As you can see, social sector comes first, followed by education. Okay. Now Hani will present the trends specific to education.
Yeah, thank you, Rahul. So, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so now before me, Rahul talked about the overall scene, how the foreign philanthropy is coming into India and how states are getting it. But now I'll deep dive into a particular sector, which is education. And I selected this sector because it is a really important sector in India, in the context that because India is a developing country and we have very limited public spending on education, and therefore in the context that India has a huge population, like a quarter of whole population is below 15 years of age, so therefore spending on education becomes important, and therein the role of non-government entities also comes into play, wherein they can complement to the process of spending on education. So that's why I decided to look closely onto this topic. So the question which I was dealing with was that why the states are getting what they're getting. So in terms of the total money that is coming in, how is it reaching the different states? Are all the states who are performing poorly in education, are they getting more money? Or the states who are well off getting more money? Yep, next slide. So the way we went about it was that we collected data and were provided data from, of course, from CSIP, and then there's this Niti Aayog in India, which does most of the policy work and evaluation work. So they also collect data. So they had this data on education index and had marked different states based on their performance in education sector. And then I also used data from the Reserve Bank of India in terms of how the states are performing economically, what is their SGD, state gross domestic produce. So those are the kind of data sets that I used and merged them and in terms of like there were different sectors in which the funding was coming. So I summed up all the data on education sector for different states across the 3 years that we were considering. So this, the first graph which I'm showing today, is the graph between the sum of the amount in education sector received by different states, and this is plotted with the score the different states have in the education performance. So therein the correlation is slightly weak and 0.32. So yeah, let's move to the next slide. Herein on the left side, you see that this is a graph which is showing the sum of the amount again received by different states in education, and the state GDP as GDP per capita. And in this, you see the correlation is again very weak, which is 0.094. But when you like plot the same one, but not with per capita, but with SGDP, you see a good correlation of 0.54. And herein, if like the capital state of Delhi, if you remove that state from the data, then this correlation jumps on to 7.9, which means that Delhi is an outlier, and it's I call it the Delhi effect because it's the capital city and most of the NGOs are situated there. So it's quite like easy for them to get access to the kind of registration you need to get the certificate to get the foreign funding. So in that terms, Delhi is an outlier in this, and definitely, so you see the correlation. So the inference I draw is that the amount received depends on the economic condition of the states. So next slide. Yeah, till now we've seen the recipient side of the data, like this, how the states are getting and what kind of profile do the states have. Now we'll jump into the donor side of the things. So we'll see how are the countries situated or what kind of donors are there. And this work has been primarily done by our teammate, Diamond McDonald, but he's not able to join today. So I'll present his part. So there, India, like we have four major sectors, four major funding sources. So in the philanthropy sector, so one is foreign, then corporate, retail, and high net worth individuals. And the foreign funding component in the philanthropy space in India has like remained around 20-30%. Like foreign funding is comprises of the total funding space in India. So therefore, it becomes important to see what kind of donors are coming in. So this first graph shows the visualization of shows the share of the country's funding that is provided by the institutional donors. So we've divided the countries into quantiles by the total amount of funding. So you see in the top quantile, that is quantile 5, we've got countries like UK, US, Netherlands, which typically provide highest amount of funding to Indian non-profits. And in the lowest quantile, that is quantile 1, you see countries like Afghanistan, Bolivia, and Madagascar, which provide less funding to India. So therein, the inference we draw from this is that the difference between the quantiles is surprising because the institutional donors are able to more funding than individuals. And other inference drawn from this is that you see that the lowest quantiles, there you see more variation is there. And yeah, you see that sometimes it goes to 0 and then other times it comes to 20%. So there's more variation in the lower quantiles. So yeah, next slide. And that's the last slide for today from our group. So this graph shows the distribution of changes in the ranking of a country. We rank the countries by how much funding they provide to Indian non-profits. So a country like US, which tends to provide more funding to India, is at the top of the ranking, whereas the countries like Senegal or Iraq appear at the bottom of the rankings. So how we analyze it was like you see that in 2015-16, Bosnia was ranked 77. But in 2016-17, it ranked 125. So there was a change in the ranking. And so the line at 0, you see the horizontal line, the points above it are the like advancement in the ranking, and the points below it are the decrease in the ranking from the previous year. So what we've observed is that on an average, countries retain the ranking over time. That is, they maintain their relative importance to Indian nonprofits in terms of the amount of money that they're giving and their ranking. Though the small changes are not so, like the small changes are also very common. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Silvana, I'm coming to you for some feedback. Can I ask you to give one feedback in like vocally, and then add any feedback in the chat, because we're running a little bit behind of time. This presentation lasts a little bit long, and I don't want to detract from the next presentation. So Silvana, your number one highlight, and the rest.
Pretty quick. I'm loving it. I think it's providing a lot of information. I think it could be really useful to understand the situation of education or any other area of policy in a particular country. I think it's giving us a picture that could be really useful, not only for policy development in a particular country, but also to think about foreign contributions to NGOs or others. And I'm waiting to see if this same exercise could be applied to the other years, I mean, 2020 until now, because I'm thinking that the differences and the changes in the fundraising and in the funds structure from different countries, I mean, because of the COVID and other situations, could later have some impacts in, for example, education in a particular country. So I want to see that because I think that this provides a lot of information and many areas for improvement in terms of the work of the NGOs, the work of other countries providing funding, but also policy development in a particular area.
Thank you so much, Silvana. I'm moving us along in the interest of time, and we have Fernando Zioma presenting on Hack Team 22 Village Enterprise, the deep results. And I'm asking Carolina to comment on this. So maybe you have a few seconds if you have additional comments from our Indian colleagues. Thank you. Zioma or Fernando, who wants to go first?
I'll start. Hi, everyone. I'm happy to be here. So we worked on the Village Enterprise deep results. Next slide, please. And here's just a little background about Village Enterprise. It's the first ever developmental impact bond for poverty alleviation in sub-Saharan Africa. It was launched in November 2017, and it lasted for about 3 years. The main target population was households living in extreme poverty. And the goal of the impact bond was to improve the income levels of at least 12,660 extreme poor households in rural Kenya and Uganda, by creating 4,000 sustainable micro enterprises. The outcome matrix, this is the things through which the outcome of the impact of the project was evaluated. The first indicator was to see an increase in monthly consumption per capita in USD. And then the second was to see an increase in assets in USD per capita as well when compared to the control group. Next slide, please. So this is what the data looks like. As you can see, it's like a lot. It's like lots of rows and columns. Next slide, please. So what we did was to try and create our own data dictionary so that it's easy for us to visualize the results that we had. Next slide, please. So here's what our task is. Like I said, the data was large and complex. So what we did was to figure out a way where we can show the results of the RCT evaluation of the Village Enterprise Deep in a simple and effective manner. And more importantly, to present this information in a way that is very simple to general members of the public or to policymakers. Thank you. Next slide. So here's what we did and what we found out. We didn't want to reinvent the wheel. Already there was like a very comprehensive report that was done by the Village Enterprise team. So what we did to start off was to read the final reports and to try and analyze the other aspects or figure out what other things we could do with the data that we had. Next slide, please. So as we see, the report already proved that the Village Enterprise Deep had positive outcome. As you see in the graph to the left, there's increase in the monthly consumption for households when compared to the control group at the beginning of the project. Next slide, please. Same thing when comparing the net assets. And remember, I said that these were the two outcome metrics to judge or to evaluate the impact of this project. Next slide, please. So what we did with this data set was to figure out other ways that we thought that we could interpret the data and how we thought we could simplify the visualization so that it's easy for anyone to understand. And a quick note on the simulated treated variable, the data that we used were not like, they were simulated. This means that the visualizations you'll be seeing do not exactly explain the actual impact that happened in the project because the data is simulated. Then next slide. Okay, thank you. So here's the beginning of the findings that we had. We created this dot plot, which showed the difference between averages in the two groups, that's the control and the treatment group. And we thought that this could be a nice way of showing the differences in average between the control and treatment groups across the different groups. So if you see in the bottom part of it, where it shows country 2 Uganda, country 1 Uganda, you could see the red and the blue line, dots rather, and understand at first glance what that means in terms of the difference in the monthly consumption, average monthly consumption. Next slide, please. And we did the same thing as well, but this one is showing the difference in the household assets for both the control and the treatment groups. Next slide. However, averages could hide lots of details. For instance, if there was a particular household that happened to have a very large monthly consumption, that obviously would affect the overall average, and it might be a bit skewed. So what we did was to look for that to see the distribution curves. And in this, we were studying again still the monthly consumption, which is one of the outcome metrics. And we were trying to see the patterns between, so this axis, the y-axis is showing, the y-axis where it's written count is actually representing groups of households, and X is representing the monthly consumption in USD. So you see that a lot of the households in this right corner were between 0 to 200 USD. Next slide, please. And we replicated the same thing, but in this one, we were just showing household assets. So now I'll hand over to Fernando, who will talk us through the remaining findings, and we had more opportunities for exploration, and also how this can be made available for anyone else who's interested to explore more.
Thank you, Vioma, and thank you, ID Insight, for sharing with us this data. It was incredible playing around with it. So moving on, something that we thought that we could unpack a little bit more is disabilities, because we were struck by the really huge percentage. So households with at least one person with disability is almost half of the sample. So we decided to explore a little bit more. Next slide, please. But we knew already from the report that you found a positive effect of the intervention, both in terms of consumption and net assets for both groups. So households with a person with disability or with no person with disability, the intervention had a positive effect, both in terms of consumption and net assets. Next slide, please. But still, we thought about like, okay, but how can we unpack a little bit more this disability thing? And we could see like through this simple distribution plot here that this is like this overlay distribution. So we have people with someone with disability and without disability, assets at the left graph, consumption at the right graph. And we could see, as you mentioned in the report, that people with disability, households with a person with disability, they actually consume more in average. And that's something that we think that in terms of policy making and investigating how the program intervention impacts people, not only in terms of vulnerability, but also disabilities, might be quite insightful for policy making. But that's something that is more useful in terms of next steps.
Fernando, sorry to cut through. It's just that I want to allow enough time for the last challenge, and we are running a little bit behind schedule. Can you give one highlight on the opportunities for the future, and then we go to feedback and we move to
Sure, Mara.
Thank you.
So apart from this, we're using data on consumption because you have amazing data, granular data on several kinds of asset items that people might buy. And that's it. I shared the report. The link for the full report is at the chat, and looking forward to questions.
Thank you, Fernando. Sorry for, I know you had more to share, but let's hear, Carolina, over to you for your feedback before we go to Juliana.
Okay, thank you for the presentation. I really enjoyed seeing your creativity in presenting the results of the RCT. So I'll make 2 big comments here, and then I'll make the rest in the chat. Okay. So about the data visualization, I like your new ideas of showing the effects in the 2 different types of diagrams. The first one with the dots, I would just suggest connecting one dot to the other. From what I understood, the longer, the bigger the distance from the dots, the higher the effect, correct? So it would be very nice to see how long are the lines connecting the dots. It would be easier to visualize, but I really liked it. And you can see like it broken down for different groups in one big diagram. That's what I liked most. And about the distribution, I think it's awesome as well. Sadly, it's only a fake treatment dummy, so we could not see different points of the distribution where the effects were bigger or smaller. That would be awesome to see that. I really enjoyed the visualization that you guys created. The other point I was going to make, it would be amazing to go a bit outside the box and learn whether these effects are comparable with other RCTs performed for other similar programs in other contexts, so that we could learn about external validity, and as well as whether the design of this specific program is more effective than other similar programs of the kind. So on that, my point goes back to why are we doing RCTs in the first place? So we want to achieve sustainable development. We go to the micro level and want to learn what interventions actually work, so that we can scale up and implement in other places and foster development. So for that, I would just emphasize the importance of describing. I know you didn't have time, but like seeing the results of an RCT without knowing the specificities of a program is useless, right? So I'll just like leave this special note that whenever we're showing results of RCTs, no matter how incredible our data visualization skills are, if we do not describe the program, then people are not going to learn anything to advance sustainable development. So I'll leave my other specific comments in the chat and not take more time of the event.
Thank you, Carolina. We have the last challenge, who is going to be presented by Juliana in collaboration with Stamp and Manuya. By experience, I know having 3 presenters extends the presentation, so I'm afraid we will overrun by 2-3 minutes, and apologize in advance. Juliana, over to you.
Thank you, Mara. I know we have very little time, so I'm going to be quick. We were in charge of the Education Outcome Fund Challenge, and for those who don't know what the EOF is, I can say that the EOF is an ambitious effort to significantly improve learnings and employment outcomes by tying funding to measurable results. It is a new outcomes fund, and the first partnership that they established is the partnership that they have with the government of Sierra Leone, and they are starting to work with 5 different projects in that country. Our challenge, I'm going to describe our challenge in very few words. What we did is to imagine that we were employees of the EOF, and we were in charge of keeping track and monitoring these different outcome-based contracts. And we really wanted to understand which contracts were overperforming and which ones were doing not that good. So we imagined that that was our position, and we wanted to think of a data platform that would provide us with data to make those kind of decisions. This is what we do. We subdivided our group in 4 different teams. There was a sub-team for service providers, another one for evaluators, another one for investors, and another team was thinking of the general overview of the platform. And each of these teams developed a form that the different stakeholders would fill in to report on their data. So the providers designed a form that providers would fill in to report on their services, and this is what the form could look like. We are always assuming that the contracts are already part of the data platform, so the main outcome metrics are already there. What we thought would be useful for the service provider is to have some fields where the system would complete automatically the data that is already there. So for instance, service provider shouldn't have to complete the definition of outcome metric number 1 because it's always the same. But we thought it was important that the service provider would complete the target achievements for the quarter and the quarterly achievements, so we can compare how the project is doing. And we also thought that it was important to leave some place for comments or for explanations in case there are significant differences between the targets and the actual achievements. And we thought that this set of fields should be repeated for every outcome metric. So every outcome metric should have a definition, target population, a description of the activities, the targets, and the achievements. I want to pass it on to the evaluator group, which will be explained by Manuja.
Sure, thanks, Juliana. So next slide, please. So here we have assumed that the evaluator would actually play two roles. One is that of the verifier of outcomes, as in they actually verify the outcomes reported by the service provider against the findings that they have. So which will actually just look at what outcomes have been actually achieved, and then they'll also do the role of the impact evaluator, which probably they'd like to have a baseline data that they would have before the intervention, and then they would compare it with the outcomes that are actually achieved. So that would be the role of an evaluator. They're basically doing two roles, and these could be the kinds of forms that they could use to actually work in the field. Yeah, next. Juliana, what do you?
Thanks. And then we have Stam, who's going to explain the investors form.
Okay, thank you. So this is how, next slide, please. Thank you. And this is how the form for the risk investor could look like. We divide the form into 3 sections. The first part is basically the general information, which include the name of the lead investor, types of the fund, and geographic interest. And the second part is the most important one, which include the investment size, outcome metrics, and expected return. Here we can use the form to track the metrics viewed, repayment schedule, expected return, and the flexibility of the investor regarding the metrics. And the last section is the supplement information about risk mitigation, non-financial resources that the investor brings into the partnerships, and the co-investor as well. And we believe these are the essential data that we would require the investor to pull the data from the contract or the term sheet that they have and provide to the project. Thank you. Next, I would like to hand over to the general overview team.
Thank you. And the last team was in charge of thinking of the general overview of the data platform. And we didn't have much time to work on this, but this is how we think the data platform could look like. So every employee of the EOF should have a unique account. And we thought that there could be a nice map where they would have a PIM, where every place where they have a project, and they would have also access to the data at the fund level. So every time you're looking at the overview of the platform, you will be able to download the data at the fund level, but also on the right side, you have the possibility to go and see the data at the project levels. The initial interface also has some summary data at the fund level again. So we thought that we could have some key figures such as the amount of investment for these projects, the number of students engaged, the number of professors engaged, etc. And again, if you go to the data, every project should have a particular profile, and it was a good idea to have some summary data before you click on the project, and that could be the region, the name of the service provider, who's the investor, which are the main outcome metrics, etc. We didn't have enough time to design it, but we also thought that there would be a way in which these 3 forms filled in by the service provider, the investor, and the outcome and the evaluator would all come together and feed a nice, huge data set about data on outcome-based projects in Sierra Leone. But that's something that we want to keep working on in the future, probably in the next Hack and Learn. And that's it. I don't want to take more time, and I'm sure we can keep working on this because we were really, really excited about this challenge of designing a data platform, and it was looking really nice. But yeah, we only developed 2 interfaces. That's all.
Thank you. We have very short time. We asked Silvana to give a comment, but I would also invite Milena to give her comment in the chat, maybe in the interest of time. So Silvana, 2-3 minutes, high-level comments, and then
pretty quick. I'm going to be pretty quick because I'm aware of the time. I think it's really important to have this kind of data. I mean, because in many cases, assessing projects is really difficult because we don't have the necessary data to do that. So in that sense, congratulations. I think it's a really important project. Just a couple of things thinking in the future of how to move forward with this project. I would like to have, as you mentioned, Juliana, some kind of feedback mechanism, or I'm not sure exactly how it's going to look like, but where the investor, the service provider, and I mean, all the stakeholders involved could check the progress or not, or the money invested, or the next payment, or whatever it is, the all stages of the project, so they can all be aware about what is going on and what is working and how. And the other thing before moving forward, I think if you don't do, I mean, haven't done so, I think it's really important to have focus groups or interviews with the real stakeholders. I mean, not just on paper, but talking about, for example, the service providers that actually do this kind of work, because in many cases, and we all do that, think about all the things that we need to evaluate or to assess something, but then we don't know exactly how the other people understand the same thing, and if they have the knowledge or the capacity to do that. So I think in that sense, to move forward and for this to be really useful, because I think it is, it's important to talk to the real people involved in the future. So that's it. Quick.
Thank you so much, Silvana. We are already 4 minutes over time, so I just want to thank you, everyone, and make 3 points on what happens next. First, Juliana is leading the preparation of a blog post, and she will invite all of you to contribute to share the learning, and we will discuss and present the highlights from our work at the next peer learning session, which is on the 26th of May. A second thing is that the Slack channel are open. So we did some prototyping over 2 weeks. We got our head around the problem, but we will continue working, and you are welcome to join and get in touch with teams and give your feedback. Reach out to us if you are new to this and you don't know how to access the Slack channel. We'll give you access. And finally, at the conference that we have in September, this year is on the 8th and 9th of September, we are planning a panel session on Indigo. If you have particular ideas, you feel strong of any of the challenge that you see and you want to suggest something that should come next, again, contact the Indigo team. And other than that, we might see you on the Slack channel or in video or in person at the next Hack and Learn that will take place after the conference in September. So thank you, everybody, and happy learning.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.